What's up guys, and welcome to the 2022 Subaru WRX. This is the VB chassis code. There's no STI model for this generation, unfortunately, but I've been curious about this generation ever since it came out. Subaru finally moved to an all-new engine family in the FA24. To be specific, this is the FA24F, which is a 2.4 liter turbocharged boxer 4-cylinder engine. In this application, it makes 271 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque. The car weighs a little over 3,300 pounds. This is the premium model, not the limited, so we don't have the fancy Alcantara seats. And the owner Bao has done just a couple of mods to make the front end feel a little bit sharper. He added the JDM STI flexible strut tower brace and the draw stiffener, and what he said is it basically makes the front end feel a little bit sharper and improved steering feel just a tad. Of course, this car's all-wheel drive, has a 6-speed manual transmission. Unfortunately, it's only a little bit more powerful than the outgoing VA generation WRX. I think the horsepower increase was about 3 horsepower. That's a little bit disappointing, but let's reserve final judgment until we've driven this thing. First impressions of the interior: it's dominated by this large vertical touchscreen. It's fairly easy to use and it's very clear, but I'm really not a fan of having any of the climate control buttons on a touchscreen. It's just such a pet peeve of mine. Unfortunately, Subaru decided to do that with the WRX. At least the BRZ still has dedicated physical controls. Otherwise, the interior feels pretty typical Subaru. It's not impressive from a materials standpoint. There's some pseudo carbon trim on the doors here. Lots of plastic cloth seats, of course, but at least the steering wheel feels nice, and the seating position with the seat all the way down actually feels reasonably good. So with that, let's see how this thing performs on this canyon road. Manual handbrake, gotta love it. Very easy to use manual transmission and clutch. The clutch feels actually pretty good in this. Very quick steering ratio, very light feel from this EPS rack. Not a ton of feedback right away as I attack these corners for the first time. Never been on this road before. Good torque, pretty good throttle response as well. Gearing is actually nice and short. Getting close to the top of second gear on this very windy, tight road. Very easy to heel toe. All of the controls of this car, the driver inputs, are very light. You can just flick this car into corners with this quick steering rack. The shifter's very low effort as well. The clutch, brakes, throttle. Kind of wish there was a little bit more heft to it, but the lightness does make it very easy to just hop into this car and start pushing it right away. Brake pedal's actually not great. It feels definitely soft. 2 piston calipers at the front, single pistons at the rear, and the rotors themselves are only around 12 point something inches in diameter at the front. Definitely an under-braked car for over 3,300 pounds of curb weight. This thing could definitely use a Brembo upgrade from one of the prior generation STI models. There's really no power to speak of below 3,000, maybe even 3,500. You really have to keep this thing in the upper half of its rev range. Such an easy car to drive quickly though, as long as you can keep the revs high. On a road like this, that means mostly second gear. Really easy to heel toe. Easier than the BRZ, actually. We have fixed dampers, only the GT model, I believe, which comes in CVT transmission form, only gives you adaptive dampers, but I think this base fixed suspension actually does really well. It's comfortable, it soaks up the bumps, reasonably firm for aggressive driving. This car just inspires confidence. It's just so easy to drive. We may not have picked the perfect road to test this WRX today. It's very, very narrow, and it actually makes this WRX, which is considered a compact sedan, feel pretty big. It feels wide. Good acceleration. Exactly what you'd expect for 271 horsepower. The one complaint I have with driving this car hard is the brakes. Really soft brake pedal. Unfortunate that Subaru didn't go 4-piston up front with a larger rotor. Such a quick steering ratio. You can really just steer this thing with your fingertips. Even in the hairpins, there's no need to go hand over hand. Hardly turning the wheel more than 90 degrees. I remember when I first saw photos of the VB WRX, I was really torn because I actually quite like the overall silhouette of the car and how it looks just a bit more sleek than the outgoing model. But the thing that really ruined it for me, and for a lot of folks, was the fender flares. 100% Tonka truck doesn't do it for me whatsoever, and it's made worse by the fact that the stock wheel fitment is super sunken in and there's a lot of wheel gap, and so it just gives an otherwise pleasant looking sedan a kind of goofy look. I did see some renders, actually I'm not sure if they're actual photos or just renders, but they showed the car lowered with lower offset wheels, and the cladding or flares were painted body color, and that drastically improved the styling of the car for me. All I can say is that in stock form, VB generation doesn't do it for me. So it better make up for it with the way it drives. And my impressions again are mixed here. I like how light the controls are. The car is really easy to drive hard, easy to heel toe, good pedal placement. But two things are lacking for me. Number one, lack of steer and feel. I really just can't feel anything that the front tires are doing from this EPS rack. And number two, this engine, even though it's a whopping 20% greater in displacement compared to the outgoing FA20, it makes essentially the same power. It's just not enough of an improvement in performance over the outgoing WRX. I was at least hoping there to be more low-end and mid-range torque and better throttle response down low, but that's not really the case either. You still have to rev the snot out of this thing. But with all of that said, if you're just looking for a fun and quick and practical daily driver, this thing actually fits the bill really well. I like what they've done with the seating position over the last generation. I do feel like I'm definitely sitting a bit lower, and even these base seats do a pretty good job at holding me in. But at its price point of a little over $30,000, depending on the trim, the WRX is still what it's always been, a very quick, all-wheel drive, all-weather capable little daily driver. It's not meant to be a super sharp, hardcore track car. If you wanted that, an STI was going to deliver more of what you expected. But it is unfortunate that this generation will not have an STI model. I think with tightened up suspension, limited slip differentials on both axles, and some upgraded brakes, this thing would deliver a lot more driving thrills. But then you'd be looking at probably $40,000+. The conclusion is you get what you pay for. So no surprises here with the VB WRX. It is exactly what I expected, except maybe minus the brakes. The brakes really are quite disappointing. A big shout out to Bao for letting me review his 2022 Subaru WRX. Let me know what you guys think about this generation. What do you think about the styling? What do you think about the way it drives compared to prior gen models? Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.